I used to be vegan. I gave up consuming animal products in order to help the environment. And now I drink human blood. Can you be a tree hugger and a bloodsucker at the same time? You can. Let me explain how. A few years ago, I learned about the animal agricultural industry, or animal ag. What is animal ag? It's an industry that creates billions of sentient beings every year in order to kill them and sell their dead bodies for money. In order to maximize profits, they minimize space by forcing many, many sentient beings into a single cage at the same time. The occupants of those cages often go insane. Pigs will root in imaginary straw. Chickens will peck each other to death unless their beaks are sliced off. Animals live in their own urine and feces that develop sores and cysts and lesions all over their bodies. They're often eviscerated while fully conscious, and then their mutilated remains are sold as food. But then consumers bite off more than they can chew. Large chunks of any given carcass are often discarded, meaning billions of dollars are wasted on decomposing flesh that is never actually eaten. Well, that sounds pretty good. But it turns out, if you dig just beneath the surface, something rather frightening is awakened. You see, the process of creating and killing billions of sentient beings in order to sell their dead bodies as food that is never actually eaten does generate a lot of green, but it also generates a lot of greenhouse gases, CO2, nitrous oxide, methane. For example, when trees are leveled in order to make space to grow the food that will sustain these animals over the brief tenure of their tortured lives, deforestation also causes the displacement of thousands of other animal species, including werewolves. Further emissions are released when billions of corpses are transported all over the world, and even more are released when mountains of partially eaten bodies are allowed to putrefy in landfills. Overall, animal ag makes up about 14% of all anthropogenic emissions. And those emissions trap heat in the atmosphere like an animal in a cage. But unlike other animals, that heat doesn't get to die. Instead, it lives on and on, causing a terrifying transformation. Droughts, wildfires, hurricanes, people burn, starve, drown, survivors flee, racist, xenophobic governments refuse to help them, and the world keeps getting hotter and hotter, which means the problems get worse and worse. Like most mortals, I used to fear death, so I stopped living off the life force of other sentient beings and became a vegan. But soon I realized I was draining the world's life force in other ways. Almost everything I bought came in plastic packaging. I depended on electricity generated by fossil fuels. I flew on planes. I drove a car with terrible gas mileage. I thought about getting an electric vehicle, but it turns out the batteries rely on minerals that are mined using child slave labor. So I began to reflect. And this was back in the days when I could still do that. Why do so many plastic things come encased in yet more plastic? Why is so much of life powered by the fossilized remains of the dead? Why do we continue to tolerate slavery? Why do we buy so much decomposing flesh? Why am I so hungry? How did I get so hungry? Will I be hungry forever? And I noticed all these problems had something in common. They were about what I consumed. All the solutions had something in common. They were about what I should consume instead. It's almost as if being a picky eater was the solution we were all looking for. As if only buying the right things was what we needed to do. And in this regard, environmentalism is kind of like Puritanism for the 21st century. I thought that you always have to do the right thing in order to avoid vegan hell. The sight of a crucifix used to terrify me. I mean, it still does, but the point is, Why is it so easy to commit the sins that send us to vegan hell? And if we're sinning when we buy certain products, what about the entities that sell them to us? Those entities, the private companies that make up animal ag and fossil fuel industries, are legally considered persons. And yet, unlike most humans, they might not ever actually die. And in the meantime, they still require constant sustenance. Animal ag, for example, sucks up billions of dollars in government subsidies in exchange for millions in campaign finance and lobbying. Oil, gas, and coal companies also purchase their lifeblood from lawmakers for hundreds of millions of dollars, and in return, they get hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies, 5.2 trillion in subsidies worldwide. In other words, we pay them to sell us their own product that we shouldn't even be consuming in the first place. But those profit margins are so juicy. Animal ag and fossil fuel can feed off of them with impunity, expanding operations, buying political influence, with plenty left over for marketing, PR, and other forms of hypnosis. They are far more powerful than mere mortals. And that's why the small fixes, the individual fixes, including veganism, are not enough to stop global warming all on their own. When I learned that, I despaired. There was nothing I could do to stop this transformation. I didn't know what to do. Thought I would travel, maybe see everything one last time before it all burned away in the cursed light of a new dawn. And one evening, I was caught in the rain. I was lost in the mountains of Eastern Europe. And I ducked into a nearby castle to charge my phone and call an Uber. And that is when I met the creatures who were doing some of the most dynamic environmental activism that I had ever seen. But they didn't call it activism. They called it vamping. They didn't get around by car or plane. They changed it into bats. No emissions for travel. They lived in the dark. If anything, they only used candles, no electricity. And most importantly, they lived off of a liquid diet farmed from a single organic, free-range food source. And that food source, when it was exposed to vampirism, started vamping too, altering its lifestyle and reducing its own carbon footprint. That's a net win-win for the vampire, the food source, and the planet. When I started vamping, I felt what I could only call an uncontrollable urge or an insatiable thirst to do to others what had been done to me. But how? And that's why I invented Bleed Green, a new app for iPhone and Android that makes it easier than ever for bloodthirsty singles and concerned environmentalists to meet, feed, and change the world. Bleed Green combines traditional predation with modern technology to make transformation easy. You scroll through thousands of profiles of fun, flirty parasites. You swipe right on the ones that get your blood pumping, and an experienced vamper will come to your bedroom that very night. It's basically Grubhub combined with Tinder, and it works. In the first 6 months that we have been awakened, Bleed Green has turned over 1.6 million users. That is 1.6 million people who have changed their diet, reduced their carbon footprint, and gained immortality. And they're helping others do the same. 100% of Bleed Green users go on to transform somebody else. And we're using that success to explore even more market-based solutions to global warming. Last month, Bleed Green launched Black Box, comfy, affordable coffins made out of 100% recycled wood. Speaking of wood, we're making up for the deforestation caused by animal ag. Bleed Green collects the guano secreted by users while in bat form and uses it as fertilizer for new growth forests. These new trees not only absorb carbon dioxide, they also provide a new home for re-emerging werewolf populations. When I talk to Bleed Green users, they often express to me the same uncontrollable urge or insatiable thirst that I felt. And I know what they mean. It's the insatiable thirst for a sustainable future. You might think, as the vampiric CEO, The only thing I'd be scared of are the company stakeholders. But there are much scarier things. Droughts, wildfires, hurricanes, the resurrection of fascism. When it comes to global warming, the stakes are high. That's why we all need to stick our necks out to protect this world. Will you join us? Thanks.